Were you successful? Let's now solve this assignment together step by step, and let's add routes to begin with. Routes for users and courses, for now without links. Now, as I said in the problem set, we already have the components, so now we just need to add the routes for that. Now, I will leave the instructions here so that we can always see them, and beneath that ordered list, I will add my routes. For that, since I already installed the React Router DOM package for you, we only need to add the import for now. So we need to import that route component from React Router DOM. With that added, we can use it in our app.js file here. We can use route, and now we need to define the path for which this route here should be used. And I will use /courses here. For that case, or in that case, I then want to use a certain component I want to load. That component also needs to be imported. The imports were already added for you though, so here you can simply use this courses import and add it here as a component to be loaded. I'll then duplicate it and also add one for users where I refer to the imported users component. This will not work though. Do you know why? Because just adding the routes isn't enough. Don't forget that you also need to wrap your application, or at least the part where you want to use routing, with the router exposed by the React router. Now, in the module, I did this by wrapping the whole app component with browser router, and we can do this to mix things up, and this is optional. I'll do it in the index.js file here, but again, you don't need to do it here. You can absolutely just wrap your app component. So in the index.js file, I'll import something from React Router DOM, and that something is the browser router. Now I will wrap my app component with that browser router component now to enable routing features in my entire application. With this, make sure to save all files and thereafter go back to your application. And now since we added routes for /courses and /users, let's visit the two. Courses shows us the courses down here, and /users shows us the users page. So this is working. Task 1 was solved. In task number 2, I now want you to add a simple navigation with two links, one leading to users and one to courses. So let's go back to the app.js file and let's add that navigation above our routes here maybe. So there I'll add a nav element, which is of course optional, just good semantics. And then I'll add an unordered list with my list items. And of course you can set up the routing the way you want. Now to give this some styling, I'll use inline styles here. So I'll simply assign a JavaScript object here where I'll set the list style to none, the margin to auto actually, and auto as a string though, and the padding to 0. And my list item here will also receive inline styles. There I simply want to set the margin to, let's say, 10 pixels. I'll also set it to display inline block so that the list items are sitting next to each other. Now inside this list item, we add the links. And as you learned, you don't use the anchor tag yourself because this would lead to your page being reloaded due to the default behavior of anchor tags. So what we want to do is we want to use that link component from React Router DOM, and it's the link which we now use to, well, create a link. So here I'll add this link component, and the link now wraps our link text, like for example, courses, and we need to define a to path here. So where this should lead to, and I want to point to courses here. And this could of course also use this object syntax I taught you. Now I'll add a second link here. This link should lead to /users and should load my users. Now let's save this and let's have a look at the application. Here are users and courses. If I click on courses, we see the courses. If I click on users, we see that. And we also see the links if we are on just slash. No component is loaded in this case, but courses and users, that's working. So now with that we got task number 2 solved. I'm going to add some extra work here to make these links which actually change the styling when being active. This is purely optional, but I taught you how to do that in this module, so I want to apply it here. To style these links differently, I showed you that you actually need to use nav link instead of link. So I'm going to remove link here, and I'm going to replace the link component here with nav link. Now by default, the active link will receive the active class, so a class named active, and I also showed you how to override this class. Here I want to use the active class. Now, since in this assignment setup here, I'm not using CSS modules, and the app.js file has no CSS file, and I could of course create one, but I don't want to do that here. I'll just add the active class styling to the index CSS file, which will change it globally. And let's say an active link should have a color of FA923F, so this orange color again. With that, if we save this, you see courses has this color when it's active, and users. I didn't add the exact property to navlink because both links here actually can be treated as prefixes because I only have /courses and /users. There are no other routes like /courses /1, which would then also trigger this to be active even though it shouldn't. That's not a problem in this app, so no need to add exact here. Back to our tasks. Task 2 was solved with bonus points. Let's move on to task 3. Make the courses, so these items here, clickable. Right now nothing happens if I click them, by adding a link and load the course component in the place of courses. So let's work on that. In my courses component, it's this article here which I want to make clickable. And I also say by adding a link. Now, again, as I mentioned in the problem set, you could also solve it by making it clickable programmatically, by adding a method which gets executed where you then push a new page onto the stack manually through code. But here I'll use this link component again. So I'll import link from React Router DOM like this. And now I will simply wrap my article into this link. So here I'll use parentheses so that I can easily write multi-line JSX code, grab this article part and put it between the parentheses here, add a semicolon after the return parentheses, and now the key needs to go onto the link element because it's the topmost element in this loop now. So let's add the key to the link. The link, of course, also needs a to statement, and there I just want to go, let's say, to course, so to /courses/course. Let's save this, and now if we click an element here, you see I'm on course. Now to turn this into /courses/course, we have to create this in a more dynamic way. So we either hard-coded here courses/course, like this. Now if I click on courses and then a course, I am on courses/course. Or we dynamically extract this page we're currently on by turning this into a dynamic value where I take advantage of the props I have with this props, the match object and the URL, and then concatenate /course after that, so that now this always takes the page I'm currently on, like /courses, and then leads me to /courses course. Either way, both works. This is the more dynamic solution. With that in place, I now can also take care about actually loading a page because we're not doing this right now. To load the course component, let's go to the app.js file and let's add a new route at the bottom where I want to load courses/course. This is what I'm currently loading. I don't have a dynamic parameter in there yet. So here I then want to load my course component, which I therefore also need to import. So here I will add a new import where I import course from containers/course and in there the course.js file. Let's save all files and go back to the application. And now if I click on one of the courses, I load it below the courses. Now the reason why I load it below there is not because I would use nesting, but of course, as you learned, if we don't use a switch component to wrap our routes, which we clearly aren't using here, well, if we don't use a switch component, the React router will have a look at all routes and load every route that matches. And for courses/course, so for this URL we are on, actually both /course and courses/course match. Because by default, as you learned, this path is treated as a prefix. So as long as your URL starts with it, this is a hit. Now there are two ways to fix this if you don't want that behavior. One is to add exact here to make sure that you only load it if the route is exactly /courses. Now with that, you see only the single course is used. And of course, our goal is to load it in the place of courses. So we have to either use that or use a switch statement. So here I'll add switch. And again, it's not needed here if I use exact, but I want to show both. So here I'll add a switch component around my routes, the switch component exposed by the React Router DOM package. And now I could even remove exact because it would look for the first hit, though that would actually render the wrong component here due to the ordering, because this again is a hit without exact. So therefore we would have to move it after courses/course so that this hits first for the more specific route before the more generic route comes. So both can be used, exact or a switch. When using switch, the ordering is important though, as you can see here. So this is task number 3 solved. In task number 4, we should now pass the course ID to the course page and output it there. So now I want to replace /course with a dynamic parameter. And as you learned, you do this by adding a colon and then the parameter name, like for example ID, course ID, whatever you want. I'll use course ID to mix it up compared to the code you learned in the module. Of course, you now also need to adjust your link. So in the courses component where we have the link, we no longer want to pass /course here, but instead we want to use the course ID. That is something we actually now have in our array here. We already are using it as the key. So here inside our loop where we create all these elements, we can simply output course ID. Or to be precise, we're not outputting it. We want to append it after the URL. If we do it like this and we save all the components, and we go to courses, this will lead to a wrong URL though, because if you click on it, you see it's appended right after courses. We need to have a slash in between. So I'll actually add a slash in between the URL we already are on and the course ID. Now with that, if I save this and I click on a course, I now visit course/1 and we load the course component again. Now, of course, we don't only want to pass the ID, we also want to output it on the course page. So let's go to the course component, and in there, I now want to output my course ID. Now, here we wouldn't actually need a class-based component. This could also be a functional one, because as you learned, we just need access to the props to get access to this match object, which contains information about the route which was loaded, including any params which were passed. So there we can simply output ID here in our JSX code by accessing this props. And again, in a functional component, it would just be props, of course. There, this match object, which is provided by the React Router package. And there on the params object, we got that ID key we can access. ID would only be correct if our param was named ID though. We did name it course ID though, so we should use course ID in the course component. So we're extracting the course ID param. Now with that, let's save all files. And you already see ID 1 here. Let's load the third course. These are all awesome courses, by the way. You should definitely take them. But let's stick to this course first. So let's click on the third course. Here we have ID 3. So this is working. Let's now turn our heads towards task 5, where we should also pass the title. And we'll have a look at this bonus part later. Let's for now pass it as a param. Now, in the module, I only showed you how to pass one param, just like here. But of course, we can just add another segment where we also pass course title, for example. And again, you can name this whatever you want. Now, of course, we need to adjust our link then. So in the courses component, where we pass the course ID, we have to add another slash and thereafter course title. The title property is available because in the array which holds our course object, each object has a title property. And we're just using that in our loop. So now we construct our longer link where we also pass the title. Now in the course component, we can of course output the title just like the ID. So here we have this, props, match, then we have the params object in there and course title because that is how we named the parameter in our route setup in the app.js file. Save all the files and then go back to the application and let's now load this course maybe and we see view the complete guide. And the same for the other two courses when we load them. So this is now working. Let's score some bonus points now by now using query params. I showed you how to pass query params. Now I also want to extract them. Now for that, let's go into our app.js component and let's remove that segment because we're not passing the title as a segment anymore. We're passing it as query params instead. To pass the title as a query param, I'll go to the courses component and there I'll update my to property on the link. First of all, I'll put it into a new line. And then I no longer want to create a URL like this. I'm going to keep the first part with the ID. But then here I actually want to pass a JavaScript object where I'll have my path name, which is essentially the URL. So I'm using props match URL and course ID. But then I want to pass the title as query params, so as this search parameter. So I'll add search here, and search has to be a string where we have question mark, then any key name of your choice like title, which should be equal, and now the value. And the value simply is course title. Course title. And of course you could name this course title too if you wanted, but I'll stick to just title. So now the link we load should look differently. If we have a look at our application, if we hover over it, we can see it in the bottom left corner, it's question mark title and then the course title. Now outputting it is a different story though. For this we'll need to parse it. The parsing has to happen in the course.js file here. And this is the part which you might need to look up. For this, I use a class-based component because I'll add component didMount to parse the title. And I'll set up a state here in this component where I have a course title property, which is an empty string initially. Now in component didMount, I want to extract the query params and set them to my course title state here. For that, I'll create a new constant named query, and now I can use a built-in JavaScript object URL search params to load my query params. I created with new, and then URL search params, that's the object name, and to this constructor here, we pass our search query string. It can be accessed on this props location. Remember, we also have this location object I showed you. And there we had this search object. And feel free to simply console log this props to again see what's inside there. So now we have that query constant. And let's simply log it to see how this looks like and what we might be able to do with it. So let's save everything here. Let's go back to the application and let's click on one of these courses, maybe the Progressive Web App one. You see two outputs, URL search params, not that useful. You see that location, however, has the search param with the title. So URL search params, however, doesn't look that useful because of the way this object works. It actually allows us to now create an iterator based on it. An iterator, as the name suggests, is something like an array, something we can loop through. So what I'll do is I will use query and then call entries on it. That's a method which is available on the URL search params element. And there we can now loop through it. We can do this with a for loop. So for let param of query entries. And now let's simply log everything we can find here. If I save this and go back, still the link here is pointing me to the PWA course. You see that we get an array where the first element is the name, so the key we used in the search parameter, and the second element is the value we passed. So it's the second element in the array I'm interested in, at the index 1 therefore. So what I can do is I can call this set state and simply set course title here to param 1, index 1, because that was the value I'm interested in. And then down there, I simply output this state course title. Now with that, if I save it, we're outputting the course title again, but now utilizing our query params. This was certainly a bit advanced, but nice to know and something you might also need in your application. Let's now move on to task number 6. Load the course component as a nested component. To do that, I will go into my app.js file, remove or comment out the route here because I don't want to use it here anymore, copy it, and now I'll go into my courses component. And there, where I output my links in this section, I'll simply add it beneath that section. For that, I need to import route from React Router DOM, and I need to import course from, and now let me simply move into the course folder and there the course.js file without the file extension. Now let's grab course and use it here as a component. This link here can stay as it is. I can also adjust it to be more dynamic if I want, to always use the URL we are on as the root URL and then simply add the variable parameter. So here I could also use this props match URL, just like in the link I created up here to be based on the page we're currently on, and then attach /course ID, just as before. Let's save everything here, and let's now select a course, and now it should be loaded beneath our courses. However, you will see as you switch it, it doesn't really update the title, even though the title does update here in the URL. The ID output is updated though. The reason for this is that we parse the title in component did mount. And as I told you, component did mount is of course not re-executed because this component isn't unmounted and remounted, it's reused. The ID updates because we receive new props, so these change. But to also update our state, we also have to execute this code in did update. So I'll add component did update here. And there, I now also want to run this code. And therefore, I will again create a helper method where I say parse query params maybe. You could write this in a more generic way. And then simply call this here, parse query params in component did mount and component did update. Save this file, and you see we're back in infinite loop world. Now to prevent this infinite loop, I will simply check if I really need to call set state again here. So we parse the query params, of course, and now I simply want to loop through the entries, but I'll only call this set state if we got a new course title. So I'll check if this state course title is unequal to param1, which is the extracted course title. And if this is the case, I'll call setState again. Otherwise, I won't. With that, if we save this, I can change it. It will update, but it doesn't enter this infinite loop here. By the way, it's always printing this console log statement here twice, because of course parse query params is ran twice. The first time when it successfully updates it, which retriggers an update, and then the second time after this retriggered update, but there it will fail at this step here, so it won't enter the infinite loop from this point on. So that is the part where we create this as a nested component and we successfully update it too. Let's now add a 404 error page and render it for unknown routes. For that, I'll go back and I need to create a new page for that. This can all just be a single component, doesn't need to be container, won't pass any state down to any other components, though our existing containers also don't do that. But I'll just want to create a very simple component here. I'll name it nomatch. And of course, the file is then named nomatch.js. And in there, I'll add a nomatch function, which simply should output some very simple JSX where I say page not found, something like this. Maybe then add some inline styling here, where I simply use text align to center this. Now, since we use JSX here, we of course need to import React from React. And then here I will export the nomatch function as the default of this file. Now we can use this as a component, and I want to use it in the app.js file. Here you learned that you can add a catch-all route by just adding route without a path. And of course, I still want to point to a component though, to this new nomatch component. So let's import nomatch from, and now that can be found in a component, should be named components. Let's add an S at the end of this folder. So in the components folder, there in the nomatch folder, obviously the nomatch.js file. Let's now grab nomatch here, and at the bottom route, which should be the end, the last route, because it catches all other paths, it catches everything. So it should be the most unspecific route at the end. Here I'll add component and point to that nomatch component. With that in place, application should still work as before, but if I enter something random here into the URL bar, we get the page not found component. So that's task number 7 solved. Finally, let's add a redirection to redirect all requests to /all courses to courses. For that, I'll add my redirect statement here in the switch statement. So I'll import redirect, then go down to the switch statement here, add redirect here, and redirect from /all courses to just /courses. It's a self-closing component. Let's save this and let's try it out by manually entering all -courses here as a path. Hit enter and update this by adding a S so that it should work. So let's try this again. Let's enter all -courses here, hit enter, and we're forwarded to courses. These are of course not all the things you learned in this module. You learned more, but these are the core features I really wanted to practice with you so that they are set. In the next course module, we're going to add routing to our course project, which should make this even easier to understand and hopefully helps you apply routing in your next project on your own.